training performance. This is one that a lot of people, they lose sight of, and they think, okay, well, as long as I'm getting transiently stronger, then it's fine. But what I really want to see, and what I've seen with myself, is that in the case of someone whose weight is going up, let's say faster than they would like it to, faster than they'd expect, the checkpoints that I'm looking for to make sure that I'm okay with it, that it's acceptable. Because as a coach, that's essentially like I'm trying to protect you from putting you in a position where you are gaining body fat faster than you're gaining muscle. If it's a 1-to-1 ratio, okay, like that's sick. But that ultimately is going to shorten the runway in which you can do this for. If we can skew that ratio to where you're gaining more muscle than you are fat, even better. That's the pinnacle. And to ensure that that is actually happening, to ensure that you are actually seeing those results, the things that I want to see, absolutely want to see scale weight go up week to week. Ideally, I want to see it go up in a controlled fashion, but like if it's going up rapidly, the things that make that okay, if circumference is going up in the areas that we want it to. So outside of waist, I want all of the other body parts to get bigger. Like I want the glutes to get bigger. I'm okay with the legs getting a little bigger. I want the shoulders to get bigger. I don't want the waist to get bigger. So when I compare my previous, like my starting waist measurement compared to now, I'm like, okay, well, collectively, I've gained a total of 6 inches on my body. My waist measurement in itself has gone up half an inch, like hardly. That's really good. That's exactly what I want to see. So that's green light in my book, but we're not done yet. Now I want to look at calipers, at skin fold sites, at the metric in which we're going to derive whether or not body fat is being gained. So when we look at where the fats come on, and you have to understand, like skin fold sites are not 100% accurate. There's going to be some discrepancy, even just based in like fluid retention and like how some days you're going to wake up, you're going to be more inflamed. You're going to be a little less recovered. So yes, we might see discrepancies, measurement to measurement, but collectively, what is it that we're seeing? Now, the areas that I don't really want to see body fat go up, belly button, lower back, even on the legs, like those are areas that where I'm predisposed to see more pinchable fat. Now, when I say we don't want to see fat's going to accumulate. Like you're going to see body fat come on. We just don't want to see it come on faster than which it is coming on. I guess, no, that's not true. Let me rephrase that. If it's coming on in these areas that are, let's say, areas that we also want muscle to build. Like I want more glutes. Cool. Okay. If there is any kind of discrepancy, and let's say like that pinchable area is the same, okay, well, that's good. That's a positive in my book. If we are not seeing any kind of increase in body fat gain in those areas, cool. Now, where do I expect the body fat to come on? It's probably going to be in those ranges that we technically don't want to see. Like there's no reason. We don't expect growth. So like, let's say the core, for instance, like I'm not training my core. So it's more likely and more acceptable to see that there's some, again, very, very minor. We're talking about like 1-2 millimeters. Like even then, that's not going to be happening every single week. If that changes, well, it's less of a surprise because we're not necessarily training that muscle for growth. Whereas if I'm seeing circumference go up of my glutes, but I'm seeing body fat go up, at a faster rate than that, that's not favorable. That's not what I want to see. I ideally would like to see that body fat is like holding the same, if not getting lower, which is essentially what I've seen at this point. Like my upper glutes, like they have hardly changed whatsoever. They're roughly the same measurement in which they started. My lower glute started at around 14 millimeters, a little bit over that. And over the last several weeks, what have I seen? It's gone down about 3 or 4 millimeters. Now, why is this? What can I derive having that information? I can derive that, maybe what is being pinched, maybe there is something that is not of fat content, so fat-free content that is now pushing against the skin. So whatever I'm pinching, it is not as fat dominant. Really though, what I think you need to take away from this is that if that's happening in measurements and skin fold sites alongside scale weight, theoretically, we should see, and I would say even past theoretically, it's very important that we see improvements in training performance. And if that's not something that you're actively tracking, it's going to be very difficult to derive whether or not there are actually improvements occurring and whether or not muscle is being built. So I can tell you that, like, for the last 7 weeks, my training has been very standardized, not to a point where I feel it is, to a detriment. Like, there have been modifications that have been made based on what I'm feeling, based on different changes I've seen week to week. But I can say with a lot of my primary movements, with my B stance RDL, with my squat pattern, with my hinge, I've made huge leaps and strides ahead in the weight that I'm lifting. Like, by far, this is the strongest that I've ever been. At this point, like, I've made one adjustment to calories only because, again, I'm continuing to see body fat technically go down. Even though I feel fatter, even though I feel bigger, what I'm seeing on measurements is that body fat is going down, which is positive. Now, this alongside training performance consistently going up, this is exactly what I'd like to see, ideally. Now, let's say in the case that someone's training performance isn't going up, but we're seeing that circumference is going up and body fat's going up, and body fat maybe is going up a little bit faster than we'd expect. That might be a point where we have to consider, okay, what is the limiting factor relative to training? Why isn't training performance going up? Now, this lends to that final metric, and that's adaptive components, the recoverability. I really want to see that someone is able to recover in a meaningful way relative to each session so that their next session, they are able to go in and make some kind of improvement. Now, I kind of skip past this, but like with training performance, a lot of people will jump to load and be like, okay, that is the thing that needs to be progressed. And yes, I think highly with our demographic, there is this belief that if you lift too heavy, you are going to build your physique in a way that is not favorable for bikini. Frankly, I don't think that's possible. I know that's not possible. I know it's not possible. I think if you train very hard aimlessly, yes, you could build proportions that are not favorable for bikini. But in terms of the actual tissue being built, it's not like if you were following a training program that is designed specifically for the bikini look. It's not like you're going to accidentally fall outside of that unless you are somehow using all secondary muscles that are not intended to do the movements that you're trying to do. Just because you haven't progressed weight doesn't necessarily mean that training performance hasn't gone up. We can look at the amount of the amount of reps being performed. We can look at the quality of each rep. Now, this is one that, like, I would say, if you are someone who is unfamiliar with what true failure feels like, this could be a really good opportunity for you to go in and set at least benchmarks for different types of movements and figure out, okay, here is the point in which I am truly failing technically on this movement. Realistically, like with like a hinge or with like an RDL, if that's something that you have in your program, which you absolutely should highly recommend, it's very unlikely you're going to hit muscular failure prior to hitting technical failure. And this is one that a lot of people, they will, kind of complain about, and myself included, and be like, well, I don't feel it in my glutes, and I don't feel like my glutes have fatigued prior to a secondary muscle group like my core. Okay, but the fact is you're doing a hinge movement. You're doing a movement that, assuming that you're doing it correctly, like from a technical standpoint, there's no way your glutes aren't working. Like that just is fact. Like that is the case. Like, yes, the sensation might vary depending on several different factors, but there's no way that you are hinging, if you are actually truly hinging correctly, that your glutes are not taking a predominance of the load. Now, in the case that, let's say, you're finding that technical breakdown is occurring sooner than, like so much sooner than the muscular stimulation, the sensation that you're after, maybe not with like a hinge, but like with something that is externally braced. So maybe like a leg press, or even like, I don't know, like a kickback. Okay, then we need to improve the technique. We need to improve the skill of the movement. Now, that's something that you can use to objectively say, like, I have made progress in my training performance. Like, my performance has improved because I've gotten better at this skill. Now, if you're getting better at the skill, even though weight might be the same, even over the course of, let's say, 7 weeks, just because you're lifting the same weight, if you're doing it better, if the quality of each rep is being done in a way that's conducive with you getting a better stimulus out of it, that is a performance increase. Now, from here, we can start getting very rigid with like, okay, here's the target working rep range I want you to be within. So and again, not all exercises are created equally. So there's going to be a fatigue cost associated with each type of movement, something that is more of a compound movement, a squat pattern, a hinge. Yeah, you're going to find that different body parts are going to fail prior to the body part that you were predominantly trying to focus on. Now, because of that, you're going to ultimately be able to leverage, and I guess really, how should I say this? You're going to be able to focus on you're going to be able to go into the movement with a focus on loadability as opposed to just tension. Now, with an isolation movement where loadability is a constraint, even something like a hip thrust and loadability is a constraint for hip thrust in a completely inverse fashion, but something like a kickback, okay, well, loadability, that's going to be a ceiling in which you hit very quickly. Same thing with like a rear delt fly or a lateral raise. Now, if that's the case, you have to create means in which you spend more time putting the muscle under tension. So that might be incorporating something like a tempo. That might be working up to a higher number of reps per set. But really, if you have a means in place, and like, I guess what I'm trying to get at with this, because I don't want this to be just like a technical segment around training. If you have a means to track your training, you're already doing better than a lot of people, because essentially what we need to do is there needs to be intention with the type of movement you're doing. So if that's not there, start firstly with like, am I doing the same movements or relatively the same movements each workout? And it's not like lower 1, lower 2, lower 3. I'm not saying each of those days do exactly the same workout. I mean, lower 1 week to week needs to be the same movements, needs to be roughly the same amount of sets. That those are not things that we should be undulating often. Like, if the program is designed well, we should be able to instill that, follow the program, and then only adjust as needed. Now, then once you have the target rep range, let's say the target rep range is, 10 to 15 reps. Okay. If you've standardized the movements that you're doing and the number of working sets you're doing, okay, now let's standardize the way that you're doing each movement. So that means aiming for an intensity that is repeatable. So having an objective way to quantify the intensity that you're performing each set at. Now, what I like to do is use a metric kind of like RIR or RPE. So use an intensity scale that essentially allows you to dictate, hey, I have hit true failure. In this case, that means like objectively, you are hitting a point close to the end of the set. So if the target rep range is 10 to 15, maybe around reps 8, 9, 10, maybe that's the point where you see a decrease in the velocity of the rep speed. So you go down for a squat, and on the way up, instead of being able to just finish it at an exact same velocity, you hit a little bit of a decreased velocity. You hit kind of a sticky point. We don't need to come to a complete stop. We don't need the rep to be, you don't need to grind it out. It's great if you can, but there are recovery costs associated with that. So in the case that you've now standardized intensity, so every set you're going like, hey, I'm trying to hit an RIR of 1 to 2 or an RPE of 8, 9, 10. Cool. Okay. From here, now the goal is to progress to that upper end of the rep range. Once you hit that upper end of the rep range, maybe at that point, that should occur roughly within like 3-4 weeks. Okay, if you're doing that, if you have been successful, now you're at the upper end of the rep range, maybe the answer is to increase weight. However, if you increase weight and your form breaks down, that like the technical side of this, the skill just isn't there, that might be an indication that maybe you need to stay at that prior weight and include something like a tempo. Spend more time getting stronger in that movement, developing that skill.